Well, hello again, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for today's BU Professional Development webinar, Making That Cold Connection. My name is Jeff Murphy. I'm a member of the Career Programs team in the Office of Alumni Relations at BU. Today's webinar is sponsored by the Boston University Alumni Association and is offered to our 346,000 alumni around the globe, as well as all of our current students. Throughout your career, BU is committed to helping you define and achieve your professional goals. And we aim to do this by providing everyone with access to a series of valuable online tools and social media communities. We're very excited to have all of you joining us today from some very far away places. And I just want to make sure that you all know how much we appreciate your participation in this and every program that we offer. Before I introduce today's speaker, I have a few housekeeping notes for you. Today's presentation is being recorded and will soon be made available for on-demand viewing on the Alumni Association website, which you can find at www.bu.edu/alumni. And our speaker today is very eager to answer any questions you may have, and you're welcome to submit them throughout the presentation using the Q&A function on Zoom. Much like the chat, again, if you hover over and wait till your toolbar pops up, you can click Q&A. Go ahead and type in your question at any point, and we're going to make sure that we spend enough time at the end to try to get through as many of those as we can. You're also welcome to put a question in the chat. I'll keep an eye on both. It's now my pleasure to introduce our speaker for the day, BU College of Arts and Sciences alumna Colleen DelVecchio. Colleen is a certified Gallup strengths coach with a passion for empowering individuals and businesses to leverage their strengths and navigate increasingly complex business environments. With over 20 years of experience in strengths-based leadership, organizational change, and staff development, she guides teams to maximize each person's ability to increase their impact, performance, and job satisfaction. Colleen has a bachelor's degree in psychology from Boston University and also has a master's in nonprofit management from Bay Path University. Colleen, you are an incredibly valuable volunteer for BU. You've been actually doing these sessions for us for years. I'll actually share a link to one of your most recent ones in the chat later, but thank you so much for doing this for us today. I have known you for a long time. I think that you are really good at what you do, and I always agree with some of your tips for everybody. So the floor is all yours, but I do have to also, while you're getting your slide deck up, we forgot to talk about the fact that we have a dress code happening today with our green sweaters. So.
Our matching green sweaters, absolutely.
Right. Well, thanks again for being here, and please go ahead.
I'm so excited to be here. I love kind of working around BU alums, and I think, can you see my slides there, Jeff?
Yep, perfect. Thanks.
All right. So today we are going to be talking about making that cold connection. We're going to figure out how to find the right people that you can connect with. How do you turn a cold connection into a warm one? And you're going to actually write the script to introduce yourself, to ask someone to connect with you. So knowing that you're going to be writing the script, I recommend that you have some paper and a pen available for yourself to be able to write things down as we go through this. We will be sending these slides to you out afterwards, so don't frantically try to write down what's on the slide. It's more that we're going to be doing some kind of Mad Libs type exercises that you're going to want to be writing things down. So to get us started, Jeff, can you throw up that first poll that we have? All right, so I want to hear from you. I want to hear, how comfortable are you with reaching out to someone you don't know? Right? Are you very comfortable? Kind of, not really. You avoid it at all costs. So let's give it a minute for you all to kind of fill that in.
I love to do this with our presenters. Do you want to make a prediction on where everybody lands on this?
I'm guessing we're probably going to be most people in the kind of and the not really.
Fair. Well, it's actually almost nearly everybody's voted. We've got a few folks that I think are still trying to pick, but let's go ahead and I'll share those results so you can see them.
Fabulous. Well, half of you are not really comfortable. We got about a third, I guess, a little more than a third who are kind of. Nobody's avoiding it at all costs, so that's a great thing. And, 13% of you are really comfortable doing this. Fabulous. So thanks so much for doing that. So I will say, I am someone who has no problem doing this, right? It is something that I have always enjoyed doing. It's something that I talk to people about as a career coach that really kind of helps to build their careers. And we're going to kind of go through this today and help you figure out how to do this in an easier way that doesn't quite feel so terrifying, hopefully. So the first thing I want to talk about is, where do you actually find people to connect with? So there are so many possibilities. And over the past year, it got a little bit trickier, right? So in the past, I would be sitting here telling you about all these great places you could go in person to meet people. I think of people who I am friends with on Facebook or connected with on LinkedIn that I met sitting next to on an airplane, much the horror of my children, I must say. Or people that I've met at conferences and things like that, right? Places that I was able to easily find people to connect with. But in the pandemic, it got a little bit trickier. So some of the things we're going to talk about today are ways that you can do this virtually, but we'll also talk about in person because things are starting to open up again. So there's the usual places, right? Right here's LinkedIn. LinkedIn is one of those places that it's kind of makes sense and people expect for you to be reaching out to them on LinkedIn. So, if you're not on LinkedIn, please get on there and, look at different profiles, find things that make sense to you. But when you're on LinkedIn, you can join groups. You can connect with people who comment on articles that you're interested in. You can follow hashtags on LinkedIn. So if there's a particular thing you're really interested in, find that hashtag, follow it, and connect with people who use that hashtag. So many different ways on LinkedIn to kind of connect and kind of meet people who you might not necessarily know. The second one up here is the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce. It's a picture from that, but really thinking about places that are set up to do this, right? If you join the Chamber of Commerce and you go to a Chamber of Commerce event, there is the expectation that you are going to be connecting with people. You're going to be having that conversation with them. That's why people attend these events. And it could be other similar types of organizations, right? I've seen a young professionals associations. I've seen different small business groups, right? Plenty of different places that are set up specifically for you to connect with people. And then of course I have to plug BU Connects. If you're not on there, and I will say Jeff didn't even tell me to do this, but this is on my slide deck, even when I'm not talking to BU alums. But the idea of getting on and connecting with alums from the colleges that you went to. So BU Connects, really easy way to do that. I'm on there. I was probably one of the first people to sign up for it because this type of stuff really excites me. But if you haven't been on there, I always think of it as it's almost like our closed special LinkedIn group just for BU alums. Also think about what other schools you might have gone to. Did you get a master's degree or your JD, or even some schools, even if you took a semester there, they will allow you into their closed community. So make sure to do that. And Jeff, maybe you can throw in, oh, there you go. Yeah, I was going to say throw it in the chat, and that's what you did. Jeff just threw the LinkedIn to BU Connects in the chat. So feel free to hop on BU Connects and kind of connect with people there. So I've connected with 4 or 5 different alums on BU Connects where I've just found them because I thought they were interesting and set up a time for us to get on the phone and have a chat. So it's really not that kind of scary. So then there's places that might be kind of outside of what you might have thought of. Slack is one of those. Now, over the past year, I have joined a few different Slack channels. I had no idea up until a year ago that there were public Slack channels out there. If you're not familiar with Slack, as somebody who is class of 92, I think of them as kind of almost like the old message boards that we had when kind of the internet first became popular, right? But here, it's Slack channels where you can go and find particular areas that you're interested in. And like I said, right now, there's about over 400. I took this screenshot about 2 weeks ago. So if you are someone who is really interested in data, you can join the Data Talks Club, right? This is the place for people to talk about data. I had joined the group that was called Women Creatives, right? An inclusive network by creatives for creatives. There are tons of different ones out there that you can find and just join. And so on the Slack channel, it's just like a message board or maybe a fancy version of Facebook or something like that, but you're specifically talking about that topic. So you can go out there and meet people who are interested in the same things that you are doing. The next two are ones that were really set up to be in person, but have kind of made a really nice switch to virtual. The first one is Lunch Club. And Lunch Club is right now a virtual scenario, though I think it's going to be moving back to in person, where you can actually, you get matched up with somebody to meet and be able to have a kind of conversation with them. So right now, like I said, it's virtual. It kind of feels a little bit like a dating app when you go in and put your information in of the things you're interested in. It is not a dating app, but it has that same feel where you're answering a bunch of questions of things that you're interested in. And then each week you get an email that says, hey, are you interested in meeting with somebody for lunch this week, and virtual lunch? And who, like, what is it that you're interested in? So I checked boxes like growing my business. I'm interested in kind of careers in general. I'm interested in talking to people about their careers. I'm interested in talking to people who own small businesses who might want to hire me to do training for their staff, right? So I was able to check all of those boxes and be able to then choose each week who I might want to have lunch with. So it sets you up with someone who you might have never known. When things are back and more open, Lunch Club originally was set up that you actually met people physically for lunch. Kitchen Table is a similar idea, but it's the idea that you're in non-COVID times, you're going out to dinner and eating at a kitchen table at a restaurant with a group of people that gets put together. So I had a friend who did this out in San Francisco and was loving it. I joined a group that was specifically for women entrepreneurs. And so we had a kitchen table that we kept going for about 6 months, that we were meeting once every other week at our quote unquote kitchen table because we were virtual. But again, these are starting to kind of open up. So they're much more kind of topic driven conversations. So like I said, the one I did was women entrepreneurs, but there was one on goal setting that my friend had joined, and that's how I kind of found out about it. Then there are things that are really specific to your industry or interest area, right? So you can find events all over the place. LinkedIn now has the ability to post events there. So again, if you're following hashtags on LinkedIn, you'll start to see events pop up. Some of you might have seen this event because I posted it on LinkedIn as well. And it can be anything, right? So the first one here is from a group called WISE, which is Women in Sports and Events. They have a whole variety of speakers, as well as things that might be not quite so specific. The one on the bottom right is a woman who I met when I did my StrengthsFinder training a few years ago. And she hosts a coffee with Kelly on every Monday and Friday for up to 100 people. And her events sell out week after week. So people get on them and they tend to show up kind of week after week. And the topics vary. So there was a series that were on women who inspire. There was a Black History Month series that they were doing. Right now, Kelly's doing some stuff around working with millennials. But again, these are just events that are open to anybody that might be something of interest to you. So you can join these events and start to kind of connect with other people. And where to find these? LinkedIn really is a place that you're going to see a lot of these popping up these days. Eventbrite is the place that a lot of folks use to sign up for events, but you can also on Eventbrite follow a hashtag and follow a topic interest. So you can find things there as well. So there are events all over the place. And in this virtual environment, there are so many, the options are kind of much bigger and broader than they've ever been, because events that you might not have been willing to get on a plane to go to, you can now participate in virtually. So before I move on to how do you actually turn this kind of cold connection into a warm one, how do you do that? Do folks have any questions on kind of some of these places that you can find events that you might want to attend?
Thanks for the reminder, Colleen. Folks, feel free to, at any time, put a question in the chat or in the Q&A. So far, Colleen, Peter is a +1 for you on Lunch Club. He says he's a big fan.
Excellent.
Particularly for folks working from home, it can feel isolating, and he was saying he enjoyed the interaction. But no questions yet.
Great. All right, here we go. So now we're going to talk about, I have a 3-step process here to kind of turn your cold connection into a warm one, right? How do you go from someone you don't know to somebody who's willing to hop on the phone with you, hop on a Zoom, or meet you in person for coffee? Right. So step 1 is the introduction of yourself to someone you don't know. Right. So that's the basics. So here's where your pen and paper come in handy. So if you have your pen and paper, this is going to be step 1, right? The first thing is to think about, do you even have a loose connection to this person? So I would open an email that you would send to someone of how you're connected. So you can talk about you are connected through, you're both alums of Boston University. You could say that you're connected through and name an event that you both attended to. Or it could be a person. You could say, right, we're connected through Jeff Murphy on LinkedIn. So you want to kind of open with a little bit of how you're connected to them. Now, we're talking about cold connections. So there's a chance you may not be connected to them directly. But think about, is there any sort of way that you are connected? Is there a group you're both a part of on LinkedIn? Is there an event that maybe you both attended, right? Try to think about, is there a way for you to be able to say, we have some sort of connection? All right, so the next part is you starting to talk about things that you are excited about. And so here's where I plop up this kind of chart about flow. And I will not try to say this person's name who kind of developed this idea of flow, because I know I will butcher it. But this idea of flow are those times in your life where you kind of lose track of time, right? The things that you do and they just feel easy and great and you're energized after doing them, right? It kind of looks at this axis of the axis of challenge versus challenge and skill. And so you're looking at something that you kind of hit that place that you have just the right amount of skill, there's just the right amount of challenge, and it puts you in that place that you really enjoy doing it. So particularly when folks are reaching out and trying to connect with people for career purposes, what I find goes wrong for a lot of them is they start to talk about instantly, this is what I have done, right? So I have done this. I have been a, corporate lawyer for the past 20 years. And most of the folks who I work with might have been a corporate lawyer for 20 years, but maybe they don't want to be a corporate lawyer anymore, or they want to do something different. So I start with getting people to think about, when have you had those times of flow? Because as you're making these connections with folks, if you can make the connections around the times that you have been energized and excited and things felt like they were going really well for you, you're going to have a better connection than if you're starting with, I don't want to be a corporate lawyer anymore because I hate it. So we're going to talk a little bit about how do you kind of start that, right? So here's your next slide. I have blank years experience in blank and blank. And this is the blank and blank at the bottom. I want you to think about, what were you doing when you were in your states of flow? What were you doing in those moments where you lost track of time? Or you finished doing something and you were so energized and excited? So for me, I might have something that says like, I have 15 plus years experience in training and coaching. So I might not actually put in the exact work I do. I'm not going to put in the exact job title I do, but I'm going to talk about the kind of areas that I really love to do. And if you noticed, I did say 15 plus years in there. And that's really because age discrimination is real. So in general, I rarely try to mention anything more than the 15 years experience in. Because anything more than that is going to put you quite possibly into that track of, gosh, do they know what we're doing these days? So that's one of my little tidbits there about age discrimination. Okay, so before we move on to step 2 of this, right? Let's just reconvene here, right? You've started your email or your conversation with how you're connected. And then you've talked about the things that bring you joy and flow. What are the things that really excite you? So before I move on to step 2 here, do folks have any questions about either of those steps?
Not specifically about the steps, Colleen, but we did get a question from Kyle. You talked a lot about events, and I don't know if you're going to get into this later, but Kyle was hoping you could comment on, all right, so once you met somebody at an event, how do you follow up after the event is over and make that connection? I imagine you're going to dive in here a little bit on that.
Yeah, I definitely will as we go on. But Kyle, I will say, so here's my 2 biggest tips for events. 1, reach out beforehand. And I don't know if the person is on this call or not, so I'm not going to call them out. But there is somebody who, when they saw this event posted, sent me an email 2 days ago and said, "Dear Colleen, really excited for your event at BU this week. I'm going to be attending." Right? So that sticks out to me, because if after the event, you could always send an email that says, "This was so fabulous. Can we connect?" Now, quite often people will say like, "Gosh, would you do that no matter how big the event or who's on there?" 100%. As we go through this, I'll give you some examples of times that I have done this and have made connections with folks who have some pretty high level folks that I would not have thought would jump on the phone with me. So we'll definitely get there. So if you were sending that, you can send your email that says, "We're connected through," or you can say, right, "I attended your presentation on X, Y, and Z." And right, the things that you have experience in and the things that bring you joy and put you in flow should be things that kind of connect to what that person was talking about.
Couple people did have one question on this step. Sarah specifically asked flat out, what if you have 0 experience in the area that you're most interested in?
So here's the thing, right? Here, I don't want to see this experience in, I don't know, electrical engineering. You can put some skills in there that you love using, right? When I talked about training and coaching, I think of times where, like moments like this, I love. When I do a presentation like this, I am energized for like the next, 3 days. So think about the things that you've done that bring you energy and excitement. And you can talk about, have experience in leading people. I have experience in setting strategy. So you can think about it as those smaller kind of skill areas as opposed to the job title. I think what happens with a lot of folks when they throw their job titles out there that they have experience doing those, it sets them up to be kind of really pigeonholed. So the broader you can make some of these things, the better off you are, because the more that someone could then see a reason to connect with you and how you might kind of have that shared space. All right, so step 2 in kind of connecting with people you don't know. You have to make it a little bit more about them than about you. And right, so here's what I mean. So 1, I want you to be curious about that other person. So you need to think about, how can you reach out to them? Now, you might be reaching out to them with pure hope that someday they're going to offer you a job. But instead, if you connect with them and say, really curious about how you accomplish this, really curious about what you do, right? Thinking about your level of curiosity with that. So when I think that, I start thinking about what information is going to be helpful to you. So as you're starting to kind of formulate this, think about what could you be curious about and how they did it. So I've written statements like, I'm curious about what it's like to work in the professional sports industry and how you have accomplished so much in such a short time. Right. So think about how can you rephrase what it is, the information that you want to get, but you're putting it as in you're curious about how they've done it. Other thing I'd say here is really truly give them the kind of thumbs up and say what you're impressed in by. I always say this is where you're sending the emails or the connections to say, I am so impressed with what you've accomplished and I would love to be you someday. So you're thinking about that, you can talk about, I'm really impressed with what you kind of accomplished in this role, with how you have rolled out an alumni career service program. I'm really impressed with what you do at AIG and how you have changed the communications there, right? Look at people's LinkedIn profile. Think about something they've accomplished or something they talked about in their presentation that you know that they've accomplished, and tell them, I'm really impressed with you, right? Because if you kind of combine this idea of curiosity, right, that you're curious about them, with this idea of you are so awesome and you have accomplished things that I would love to, you're starting to make this about them a little bit. It's the same idea when people do informational interviews, right? The point of an informational interview typically is, right, for you to get out there and get some information about a career you might be interested in doing. Knowing that, where people tend to go wrong is 3 minutes into the interview, they make it about themselves. If you can keep up an informational interview where you're asking all the questions about that person and kind of almost flattering them and saying, right, I'm really impressed with what you've done. I'd love to hear kind of how you got there. I'd love to hear how you broke into this field. And you're letting them talk a lot, it's going to be a way easier yes for them. Okay, so let's move on to step 3. Step 3 is where you're going to actually make the ask, right? Because just flattering someone, just telling them what you, right, your moments of flow, kind of your excitement and the things you do, telling them what you're curious about, and then telling them you're impressed with them doesn't land you anywhere. So you have to make the ask. And here's where we get to pivot for a moment. So are you clear about what you are asking for? You know, many years ago, I did a workshop that was called If Disney Ran My Hospital. And the guy who was running it, when we walked in the room, had what's written in green here as the question on the whiteboard when we got in. And the question was, what time is the 12 o'clock parade? And we all kind of sit down and we're looking at this and I'm thinking, gosh, my boss paid an awful lot of money for me to go to this training. And this is what we're learning, right? We're learning what time is the 12 o'clock parade. But the person leading the training said, you know, in Disney, cast members, right, the employees there get asked this question fairly commonly. That's something along this line. What is the person really asking? So throw in the chat there. Tell me what you think people really are asking about. So how long is it? What time does it really start? Will it start on time? What time schedule? Where should you arrive to get a good view, right? Where do I sit on Main Street? Where can you see it? Is it okay for me to go? You know, for any of you who have been to Disney, so this picture I will say is not that you can see it too close up, but that's Tom Brady and Julian Edelman after the Patriots had won the Super Bowl a few years ago at Disney. And you look at those crazy crowds, right? So when people go to Disney and want to see parades, there's lots of questions about it, right? Is it good for young kids? Is it good for my kids? Do I really want to sit here for an hour and save my spot? Do I need to save my spot? There's a whole bunch of things people are asking about when they're actually asking about that 12 o'clock parade, right? When does the parade come by me? When does the parade go by on the other side of the park? When does it end? So many questions. So when you're thinking about this, this question has stuck in my mind now we're going on probably 15 years ago, I did that training. Is your question clear? Is what you're asking someone clear? Is it obvious? The other part of that is your ask something they can actually do? So here's my favorite way to explain this one. I have 2 daughters right now who are juniors in high school, and we are actually out looking at colleges now. So this is even more apropos than it was in the past. I have my daughters, and one of them decides they want to go to BU. If I email any of you on this call and say, hey, can you get my daughter into BU? What's going to be your reaction? Can you get my daughter into BU? Can any of you do that for me? I'd like my daughter to go to BU. It's really competitive these days. Not quite sure I would have gotten in if I had to go today. So, right, nope, you're not getting me in, right? And I'm kind of nuts for asking. I do like Philip told me to take the green line. And Sarah thinks, Jeff, that maybe you can help me. But even if I ask Jeff, so Jeff works at BU. If I turn around and say to Jeff, hey, can you get my daughter into BU? That's going to be really awkward, right? Because Jeff now is sitting at his desk going, okay, so here's a BU alum. Here's somebody who's volunteered for me. Here's somebody who's involved in the school, and I can't. So now I have to say no, and it's just not going to feel good. It's going to feel a little bit awkward. Ray's going to put in a good word for her, though. Thanks, Ray. I appreciate it. Right. But on the other hand, if I sent an email to almost any of you, now you are all folks who I don't really know very well. Now, Jeff, I know well, but many of you I don't. If I sent any of you an email that said, my daughter's really interested in going to BU, but she doesn't want to talk to her mother about her mother's experience at BU, right? She wants to talk to somebody else. Would you be willing to hop on a call with my daughter for 15 or 20 minutes and tell her about your BU experience? How many of you would say yes to that? How many of you would be willing to, or if we were in times that we could actually get out, right? If we lived close to you, would you be willing to have coffee with my daughter and tell her about your experience? Of course, you're all willing to do that. Jeff would be more than willing probably to even walk around campus if I just asked him to do that. So I want you to really think about making your ask something someone can actually do. One of the ways I see people go wildly wrong with it is that they ask things like, can you hire me? Right? That makes people feel weird. So ask people things they can actually do. So your next step in this email is, would you be willing to blank? And what do you want them to do? Would you be willing to have a conversation with me? Would you be willing to spend 15 minutes on the phone with me, right? Would you be willing to meet me for coffee, right? Think about what it is you would like them to do. So really, and we'll come back to this, so don't worry if you don't have it all pulled together. When you're sending this email or trying to make this cold connection, this is your kind of little Mad Libs here, right? You want to tell them about your connection, a little bit about you, what you're curious about, what you're impressed with, and have the ask. And it should be short and sweet. So I'm going to show you some examples that worked and some examples that did not work. So here's an example that worked last July. As I do a lot of this work, I constantly am making sure that I do it as well. So when I'm telling people that, right, you can kind of connect with people who you don't know, I'm going to make sure that I do that. And when I tell job seekers that I work with that they should be having multiple conversations a week with people who they don't know to kind of broaden their network. I do that regularly. So this past July, as I was kind of talking to some folks and someone asked me what I had wanted to do when I went to college, I said, when I went to BU, I had wanted to be a sports agent. Pre-Jerry Maguire, I wanted to be Jerry Maguire, right? And over time, that just didn't happen. Took a bunch of sports psychology classes at BU. I worked with one of the sports psych professors, really enjoyed it, but just never got there. And I was like, I'm going to reach out and start talking to some folks who do this work. So I reach out to Lorenzo here. I don't know Lorenzo. I've never met Lorenzo. We don't even have a connection when it came down to it. He is the senior manager of former players at the NFL Players Association. We do have one connection on LinkedIn, but it is actually not somebody that I know well enough that I could have actually asked for that. I sent him this very simple message, right? This is copy and pasted directly from LinkedIn. So I'm looking to make a career change into player support and engagement. So wondering if you might be willing to have a quick phone call with me to talk about your experience in this field. Super simple. He was like, sure, why don't you call me Friday next week? And he gives me his cell phone number. I asked for a quick phone call. I think we're going to be on the phone. We get on and I say, 15 minutes of your time would be great. We were on the phone for an hour and 20 minutes. I checked in with him a couple of times during that to say, is this okay? And he kept talking to me. And at the end, he connected me with 4 more people to kind of make some connections because he's like, gosh, the work you do, there are people who could use your help as a career coach. So he gave me some connections to the WNBA and looking at kind of working with female professional athletes because a lot of my coaching has been with women. I'm like, this was great. It was fabulous. And at the end, right, I sent him a thank you note and he wrote back to me and he said, no, thank you. He's like, there are days that I forget how much I love my job. And after spending that time talking to you, I got really excited to go back to work the next day because it reminded me how much I loved my job, right? Instantly jumped in, never knew him before. This is an email that a student from UMass Amherst had sent me. I sat on a Women of Eisenberg, their Eisenberg School of Management panel. And this is a college student who said, right, how would you overcome tension and disappointment with your mentor if you feel they aren't advocating for your advancement? I was like, great. Instantly said, happy to schedule a time to chat about with you. We went back and forth, scheduled a time to talk. And she was looking for an internship this summer. So I sent an email to a lot of people in my network who worked in human resources and said, are any of you open to having an intern? Right? I haven't met this young woman. She just sent an email to me. And I was willing to kind of go that distance and help her find that internship. And let me show you a couple that didn't work. I was talking about this with my husband and he instantly said, it's like the Nigerian prince email, which just made me chuckle, right? But how many times do you get those emails that are like, hey, right? I'm writing you today concerning a large sum of money I'd like to put into your bank account. Hopefully none of us are falling to that. This, on the other hand, is somebody who I was career coaching and he wasn't getting a job. So he wasn't kind of even getting a lot of the phone calls. So part of my career coaching, I make people have a number of calls each week with people to kind of expand their networks. And he was not getting anywhere. And I said, okay, can you show me what you sent? And this is the email that he was sending, right? My name is blank, fellow higher ed professionals. For many years, I was associate director at blank. My position was eliminated last July, right? Thought it was a great fit for me, challenging, rewarding. Now starts going, I interviewed for a position at your organization and I didn't get it. I was wondering if you'd be willing to chat with me via phone or Zoom to share advice on how to get my foot in the door at one of our local TRIO programs. Or if you are hiring, I'd love to be considered for the role. Right. It started off really well. And then it went down to that place of saying, are you hiring? Would you hire me? Right. Give me your advice on how to get into this job. Well, right. She didn't hear back. Other one, a gentleman that I was working with who was looking to get a job using some sort of technical writing. And this is the email that he sent out, right? I'm currently collecting information about jobs that specifically use writing skills and technology knowledge or technology background. I'm curious about you, career path, as something in your experience sounds like the type of job I would want to know more about. Can we video or voice chat sometime in the next week? You could tell me about your experiences. If you have any job openings, can you let me know? Right, so many things go wrong in this one. But again, these are real life ones that people were sending out and were surprised that people weren't reaching out to them. So, right, your quick little reminder here, talk about your connection, a little bit about yourself, what you're curious about, what you're impressed with, and the ask. So knowing that, times that I have done this, so I showed you my Lorenzo example. Every time I have gone to a conference, I have, before the conference, looked at the conference planning, reached out to whoever I am most impressed with and say, right, dear Jeff, really excited for your presentation at the CASE conference next week. You know, can't wait, plan to introduce myself to you when I get there. At the conference, I would go up and introduce myself to Jeff. Now that we're virtual, I would drop something in the chat that says, hey Jeff, it's me, Colleen, who sent you a note beforehand. And then after, I would follow up with him and say, this was fabulous, really interesting, can't wait to talk to you. Somebody who I'm currently coaching is looking to get more into the ethnobotany field. I know nothing about ethnobotany. I didn't even know ethnobotany was a field. And I kind of explained to her this process. And it's exactly what she did. She went to 3 different virtual conferences this winter, reached out to presenters beforehand and after, connected with them, and now actually is currently doing an internship that she is very hopeful will turn to a full-time position this summer. So those things start to kind of fall into place. All right, so I see a bunch of questions coming up. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we can look at each other and kind of go through what questions people have.
Unfortunately, you only get to look at me. Sorry about that. We got a couple of great ones. And again, folks, we've got a few minutes remaining here, and please take advantage of this time with Colleen. Colleen, Mark was wondering, thinks your message ideas are great. One area that's really difficult is when you take this big messaging idea and use it on LinkedIn. And Mark specifically mentions not having access to an email address, being limited in some cases, in message, and whether or not you need LinkedIn Premium is obviously a thing. The fact that LinkedIn limits you to, Mark says 300 characters. I actually don't remember. I think they keep changing that. But so I know that you believe that people can condense that message down and as you had said, get to the point and make it short and sweet. So what's your response to Mark about some of those challenges, particularly as it relates to LinkedIn?
Yeah, Mark, I hear you 100%. You saw my example that I did to Lorenzo there. That was a LinkedIn message. I am all for short and sweet. These 3 or 4 paragraph emails that I see people send trying to explain all of this, nobody has time to read those. So instead, to really simply be saying, hey, really interested, or even if it's a simple, really impressed with what you've done, would love to hear how you got there, right? So I do think kind of the keeping it simple is kind of a lot, kind of more, get you more than if you try to explain too much. Because I find when you try to explain too much, you're just telling them more information than they ever need to know. And if you're flattering people, right? If you send an email to me that says, I think you're fabulous and, would love to figure out how to be you someday, right? Obviously not those exact words, but with that tone, I'm way more willing to be like, oh, sure, I'm happy to hop on a call with you. You think what I do is great. I'm happy to tell you what I did.
This is an interesting question from Kyle, and Colleen, I'm sure you could make a ton of money as a consultant if you have this magical answer for Kyle. What happens when you flip it around? Kyle's interested in how you make an ask, a cold connection with somebody when you're in sales. So, Kyle mentions she's clearly a vendor, reaching out to the new person to share more about their company, if they'd be interested in working with us. I know that you, in some of your roles, have been on the receiving end of so many of those. So, Kyle says specifically that writing, would you happen to have time to chat about my services and how we might be able to support you, feels as an unattractive message. So what's your thoughts there? What are your thoughts there?
Absolutely, Kyle. And, I will say the minute that I put myself as a full-time coach on LinkedIn, from having it as like my side gig, I probably get 5 LinkedIn messages a day of people who are like, I can get you 10 new coaching clients every week, or right, you can be a 6-figure career coach if you just use my, kind of platform. And the first 2, I was like, oh, interesting. And then when I realized I was getting 5 a day, I was like, oh, so not what I want to see, right? So one, I think you have to be authentic. You have to go with how you, right, what makes sense for you and what you believe in. And I also find when people share something with me that is going to actually be helpful and don't do the hard sales pitch, I'm way more willing to kind of hop on the phone with them. I think of somebody I recently did hop on the phone with, sent a thing that said, here's your, 30-day Instagram, like here's the 30 things you should post on Instagram for the month of April. So it was a list of ideas for the month of April. She was a social media person. She's trying to get me to use her, right? Pay her to do my social media. I downloaded it, and I'm happy to hop on a call with her if I find it useful. So if you can give some sort of carrot that they can find it useful, you don't want to do the bait and switch. You don't want to be like, hey, I just want to talk to you because I think what you do as a job is really cool. And then find out that really, truly, right, what you're doing is just selling me.
That's a great answer. Nicely done. Romy is following up on your point about reaching out to, if you're going to attend an event and you want to reach out to one of the speakers beforehand, how do you navigate, if they don't explicitly publish an email address on their LinkedIn profile or something? What do you have tips for kind of sleuthing around and finding ways to reach out to folks when they might not be immediately available?
Yes. I mean, my kids are like horrified at my ability to do this, because I find if people say something, or one of my kids will say something, I'll be like, oh, I have to know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody who knows them. Like I can try to find them somehow. So I think it's everything from, right, if you look on their LinkedIn and you see where they work, I have gone to the workplace, right, go to their company's website and see if I can figure out their email. Jeff, I don't even know if this is your email, but if Jeff's email is jeff.murphy@bu, then I got it wrong. But right, if it was that, I could then assume that the next person that I know, if I'm looking for someone else at BU, their email is probably, steve.murphy@bu.edu. So I've done that. I've reached out to the conference organizers and said, hey, would you be willing to share Jeff's email? I'd love to connect with him before the conference. And I've had places hand that off to me as well. And, even just Google the person's name. Sometimes you're lucky and their email comes up instantly. Oh, Jeff, you are muted.
I haven't done that in a long time. I'm going to have like a quarter jar where I put a quarter in every time I talk while I'm muted. I'm going to combine a couple questions here. Pat is asking, how do you get past self-deprecating thinking? And Pat specifically said, why would anybody want to reply to me or connect with me? And then Madeline is kind of similar but different question, asking just about not wanting to bother people, not wanting to come off as being aggressive or assuming. And I think Madeline is kind of saying that I think women in the workplace are potentially or particularly sensitive to this, coming off as being overly aggressive. So how do people navigate those?
So one, why would anyone want to connect with you? There are lots of people in the world who are people like me who half of my life is collecting connections, right? I am the happiest when people connect with me. People connect with me on LinkedIn. I get like the momentary rush of like, oh, who is this new person? Let me go look at them. Now, obviously not everybody is like me, right? Like I said, my children are horrified by this side of me. But on the other hand, if you're sending, right, I'm not going to say you're going to have 100% success rate doing this. If you do, that's pretty darn amazing. But even if 50% of the people you reach out to come back to you, that's great. And if they don't, you have to think it's not just you, right? I was on vacation last week, and I have to say, right, there's probably 75 emails in my inbox right now that I'm like, oh, I really have to get back to these people, right? And they get pushed down and down and down and down. So it's no big deal, right? Maybe someone just got caught up, or maybe they're just too busy and don't care. But I've also seen, so one of my favorite speakers that I'd seen, I don't know if you saw her, Jeff, at Case, a woman named Tiffany Dufu. So she wrote a book that's called Drop the Ball, and I loved it. It was all literally about, right, like kind of putting your boundaries and saying no to things. But at the end of her speech, right, she's talking to, I don't know, 1,500 people. She's on a book tour. And at the end, she says, listen, I have 2 slots every week that I set up, networking lunches. One's a lunch, one's a coffee. If you're in New York City and you'd like to connect, let me know. Here, like right here, email me, and here are my 2 slots. Sometimes I'm 8 weeks out. Sometimes I can do it tomorrow. I emailed her, and the next time I was in New York City, we had coffee. And I start to realize, like, this is like an internationally renowned high-end speaker who has started many, many businesses, really well-published author, on the Today Show on a regular basis. She had coffee with me. So there are going to be people who do that. So part of me wants to say, don't stress so much about it. Ask. And like I said, ask in this way. Ask by saying, this is stuff I'm really interested in, and you're so amazing at what you do. I'd love to kind of hear how you got there.
We've got kudos to our audience today, Colleen. We've got some really interesting questions. We've got, I see 4 of them outstanding here. So maybe we try to do a little bit of like a lightning round. And then, do you have a hard stop at 1 o'clock? If we keep getting more, are you okay to go over by a minute or 2? Or
yeah, I can go over by a couple of minutes.
All right. Interesting scenario proposed by Gabrielle. How do you handle informational interviews where the person you're talking to keeps asking about you rather than talking about themselves? That doesn't sound like the worst thing in the world.
Right. And I mean, I get that it kind of feels weird sometimes. Part of it is make sure your setup of it is, I want to hear about you, Jeff, right? That you're not going in saying, I'm looking for a job, because as soon as you say you're looking for a job, they're going to turn the tables and ask you, and it's going to feel like an interview. So if you can go into it and with your setup being much more along the lines of, I'm really impressed with you and what you've accomplished, I'd love to hear more about it, I think that will make it kind of less likely that it's going to turn that in that direction.
Kristen is wondering, and this is a great question, what's your advice for following up with people who don't originally respond to you? And we actually also, I'll combine that with a question from Shannon. Shannon is now realizing that she'd sent some messages earlier on that didn't really follow your format. And now she's wondering, should she follow up with those folks and kind of try to correct that, or, apologize?
Sure. So I think if people don't respond, right, it's perfectly fine to send a second. I wouldn't send a second email like 3 days later, give them a week or 2. And try to, again, make the ask really specific and something that's easy to say yes to. I always think, right, lower the bar. If you email me and say, would you be willing to talk to me for 15 minutes? One of my Calendlys, right, if folks are familiar with Calendly, where you can kind of set appointments with people, I have a Calendly that I have that's a 15-minute one. So when people reach out and say, I'd love to talk to you, I send them my 15-minute one and said, sure, pick 15 minutes on my schedule sometime in the next month, right? So think about, how can you lower the bar a little bit? And if you've already reached out to them and you never heard back to them, maybe you reach out to them on LinkedIn, see if you can find an email. If you reach out to them on email, maybe you can find them on LinkedIn. So kind of think about it in that way as well.
Philip asking a question that comes up, unfortunately, quite a bit of on some of these presentations, but when you've been out of work for an extended period of time, how do you handle that in this situation where, in making a cold connection or asking somebody, if you're sitting down with that first informational interview, what are your advice for people, how they talk about those kind of gaps in their resume?
Yeah, I always tell folks, be honest, but not too honest. I think of this, I always kind of use the metaphor in terms of dating, right? If you go on a first date and you tell everybody all of the things that are possibly negative about you, who is going to want to continue to talk to you, right? So instead, you can be honest and say, right, not currently working, or you can talk about what you are doing, which I think is a more positive way to do it. And if you're not doing anything, which I always find hard to believe, I feel like everybody's doing something. Figure out what it is you can do. Pick up a hobby, learn a language, right? There's so many free things that you can do online these days. Write a book, go volunteer somewhere, have something that you can talk about doing. So,
as long we're just, oh, sorry, go ahead, Colleen.
Go ahead. I was gonna say, as long as you can talk about something you're doing, it's not going to be an issue. I used to tell folks all the time, even be able to start sentences with, I'm so lucky to be able to, right? I'm so lucky to be able to take this past year off and homeschool my children, right? It changes it from, oh my God, I got laid off and now I have to homeschool my kids.
A lot of people chiming in the chat here, Colleen, just to let you know how much they appreciate this information that you're sharing. I'll make sure to send you a transcript of the chat here. One thing I wanted to share, you were just talking about kind of sleuthing and finding, if somebody doesn't respond on email, try to find an email address to them. One of my colleagues recently turned me onto a website called hunter.io that will tell you the format that organizations use for their email. So if you were trying to connect with somebody at AIG, you would be able to find out that AIG, the corporation, uses a first name dot last name or a first name dash last name. So that's a tip to share with everybody. Colleen, my colleague and friend Reggie is glad that you mentioned your kids. Reggie specifically works with high school students who are first generation to go to university. Tips that you might share that might be different for high school students, and Reggie's giving people ideas for how they should be reaching out to professionals to learn more about their career experience and those kinds of things. What would you share with Reggie about that? Same idea, or do you tweak it a little bit for young folks?
I mean, same idea, but you go with what are the things that excite them when they introduce themselves? And Reggie, I'm happy to kind of connect and kind of talk a little bit about if you need some help this summer. I'm happy to kind of connect on that, to kind of talk more about that. That's definitely an area that I have a passion for, is making sure kids have equity and ability to access college in the same way that I know my kids are able to.
I'll make that connection happen. I was already kind of thinking about that.
Thanks, Jeff.
Okay, let's do this. We're just up against the hour. And Colleen, I have one more question, but let's do this. Would you mind, if people all do want to follow up with you, what's the best way for them to connect with you following today's webinar?
Sure. I will. So I'm going to send you can send these PowerPoints out to everybody, Jeff, as well. They can email me. My email is colleen@colleendelvecchio.com. I can throw that in the message, or go find me on LinkedIn. Happy to connect with people on LinkedIn and kind of continue to talk to people. I also do a monthly free webinar on the 15th of every month. When it lands on a weekend, I either do it Monday or Friday. That's some sort of topic. Next month is on LinkedIn headshots and visual kind of stuff online. And then that's May, and June is going to be on updating your LinkedIn profile fully. So you can always find me on LinkedIn. I'm constantly posting events as well.
And I am going to put in the chat for people that are interested in seeing more about your work. Although now the chat is being funny with me. There we go. I just put a link
Yep.
into one of your previous webinars, Right Career Right Now, so
Yep.
people can see more of your great tips, Colleen. And then let's do, I know you wanted to do this one last poll. Let's do this while we've still got folks sticking around.
All right, those of you who are left, who are you going to connect with someone you don't know now? You're going to do it today, tomorrow, or within the week? As you can see, I didn't give you the option for longer than that.
Or not going to do it at all.
Right, not an option.
All right, well,
The career coach in me. Today, yay, Ray, you get my gold star.
I'll share these results.
Nice. Well, I'm excited. Let me know how it works out. You can find me also in BU Connects. I'm in the women's leadership group and the entrepreneur group, and even just in the general group. Feel free to go in there and connect with somebody too, right? You can find someone you don't know in the BU Connects. And if there's ever a place that people are not going to say no, it should be that one.
Well, and I'm glad that you set me up to say this because, you know, as you mentioned earlier with BU Connects, people specifically say the kind of help that they're willing to offer. And so it is that warm call. I actually just last week, Colleen, did a full hour-long talk. It's kind of like a guided tour of BU Connects, plus a lot of the similar advice to what you shared today about how to reach out to folks. And so I just put a link to that recording in the chat as well, if anybody wants to check that out. But BU Connects, again, I think it's a great training ground for folks that maybe don't feel super comfortable reaching out to, you know, to make cold calls. This is a great kind of, it's almost like networking with training wheels in some ways. That's a really terrible analogy that I'm never going to use again. But I definitely encourage everybody to join BU Connects today. So, Colleen, thank you so much again for this presentation. You continue to really impress me. Just so much of what you share is so, it's kind of no nonsense and makes so much sense. And you give people a really clear, I mean, you very clearly spelled out your formula today. And so I really appreciate that and everything that you've done for BU over the years. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. Big BU fan here. Makes me happy.
Awesome. Well, and thanks to everybody for participating today. I specifically want to thank those of you who've donated to BU in the past. We really appreciate your support. Check out you'll get a link to this recording and a copy of Colleen's slides for more info. And again, visit our on-demand library at bu.edu/alumni. And thanks again, everybody. Have a great day or a great evening, wherever you might be. Take care. Thanks again, Colleen.
Thanks.